So I did want to give you an informational update today, and I have to tell you that being stuck at home, I'm not up to my usual antics of traipsing all over the world giving scientific presentations. So if you will indulge me this morning, I want to help you make sense of what's been going on the biology of this coronavirus. So don't tune out yet, because I want to walk you through a few things. So this little guy over here is depicting who's causing all the ruckus over the past few weeks. This is a graphic of the coronavirus structure. Why is it called coronavirus? Well, it's because of these spikes all around the outside of the virus that some back in the day thought that this looks like a crown. So that's why coronaviruses are called. Those spikes are really important. They refer to the spike protein right here. And the spike protein allows the virus to bind to receptors on our cells, and then those receptors take the virus into the cell. So it's a really critical part of the virus, and allows it to get access to our cells, where it causes all the problems inside, because it hijacks the machinery of our cells, and it basically forces our cells to make more virus and makes us sick. Now, one thing that I think has been confusing in the news is the testing for the coronavirus. So we don't actually measure the coronavirus particles, the infectious virus particles. What you can see is inside the virus is this RNA, ribonucleic acids. This is similar to DNA, actually. And so when you go and you get your nasal swab, the test kits extract the RNA out of the virus particles if they happen to be there. And then at the test facility, they amplify a DNA copy of portions of that RNA that are specific for this particular coronavirus. So it doesn't pick up other coronaviruses, it only picks up this SARS-CoV-2, which causes the COVID-19 disease. Now, because this is a DNA test and it's very sensitive, it's definitely going to identify if there's even a slight remnant of the virus RNA there. But you may have been confused by some reports showing that people were still shedding virus in different tissues for weeks and weeks afterwards, or that even after they recovered from their illness, people had been retested and they still showed evidence of the virus. Well, what they're detecting are just fragments of this RNA. And when your body is breaking down the virus, etc., it ends up in your urine, it ends up in your stool, etc. And so depending on where they get these samples from, you are going to find for a long time afterwards this degraded RNA that still gets picked up in the test. But that does not mean that there is still infectious virus particles left. Now, the second point I wanted to make is you're hearing lots of news now about the opportunity to maybe have an antibody test. Well, as you all know, antibodies are mounted by our immune systems when we have foreign invaders into our body. And in this case, the foreign invader is the coronavirus. Now, why this is causing so much ruckus around the world is normally we have seen all kinds of different virus varieties. And so our body has lasting immune responses to those viruses. And we always have a few antibodies sitting around that give us a head start when we get an infection with different types of viruses. We have no head start with this one. We've never seen this one before, and so any antibodies we have to other coronaviruses are not up to par. And so what we're in need for is an immune response to the virus, and our bodies are all capable of doing that. And what you may have heard recently are people who are donating their plasma because they have recovered from the coronavirus. So this is called a convalescent plasma therapy. And what they're doing is we're taking advantage of people who've already been through the infection. They've got tons and tons of antibodies swimming around in their plasma. And so you can go to a facility, they will extract your plasma, and they are actually giving that plasma to patients who are very, very sick with the coronavirus, and it helps them catch up and get on top and hopefully fully recover. You may have heard about antibody tests that are being done. Well, yes, you can measure these specific antibodies, but it takes a while to have a test that's really good, because we don't want to just pick up any old antibody against any old coronavirus. We want to know whether you've actually had this particular version of the coronavirus. So it's taking some time to, what we say, validate these tests. And I believe in the next weeks, increasingly, these are going to be available. I know the University of Michigan's working on one that they hope to be able to have launched very soon. There are some commercial ones. And this will give us some clues about who's actually had exposure to the virus. And hopefully we'll be able to prove that the presence of these antibodies give us some protection going forward. Now, the third thing I wanted to share for you today, you've probably heard about some of the treatments that are out there that have been proposed. So let's start at the top. I mentioned that the virus has to gain access into the cell. And what it does, it goes through a process called endocytosis, where it binds to the surface receptor and then it gets taken up inside the cell. Well, you might have heard about some of these drugs called chloroquine or hydroxychloroquine. These are anti-malaria drugs. Now, this virus is not malaria. Malaria is actually a parasite that exists in our blood, but it also binds to cells and gets taken up internally. And so chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine have been used for many, many years to try to impair this process. And it does have a mechanism of action against malaria and helps protect people. It's reasonable to explore this because of the way this virus accesses the cell, but it's not very specific. It's not an antiviral agent. It's doing nothing to target the virus itself. On the other hand, you may have recently heard about a drug in development called remdesivir. This was just approved for emergency use on Thursday or Friday of this past week. And it does have a specific target to block some of the effects of the virus once its RNA gets into our cells, and it prevents the virus from hijacking our machinery, and it helps people to recover faster. So I think we're pretty hopeful that this drug may be useful. Right now, it's being used in people who are pretty sick with the virus. The chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine, probably not going to be very effective for people who are very sick with the virus, but there are some ongoing studies looking at it as maybe a protection. And that's actually often how it's used in malaria. People take it when they go into malarial regions as a form of protection. One thing that's really interesting, these spike proteins, this is the target for vaccines that are being developed. The idea is that you could give people an exposure to this spike protein, not the full virus itself, but just that specific spike protein that's characteristic of this virus. And then your body would mount an immune response just against that spike protein. And then if we ever did get bombarded with the virus again in future months or years, your body would already have antibodies around, and they would be able to jump on top of this virus and hopefully contain it before you get sick. There's a recent drug that was developed that targets the specific interaction of these viruses that have these spike proteins with a type of receptor on the cell. And there's a company in England that started a clinical trial with this blocking agent. I'm pretty hopeful that this is another really important strategy. So you're going to hear more and more about all these different ways of trying to tackle the coronavirus. Hopefully this is giving you a little perspective about what's going on. Now, we are talking about God's creation today. So if we think about this SARS-CoV-2, as it's called, you may know that your DNA is composed of letters, A's and C's, T's and G's. So there's only about 30,000 letters that make up the entirety of the genome of the coronavirus. And they now know that it only encodes for 29 proteins. That's it. all of this damage and devastation that's going on in the world is being done by 30,000 letters of nucleic acids that code for 29 proteins. And if you compare this to you and I, we have 3 billion letters in our genome, and our DNA codes for 20,000 proteins. One article in describing this coronavirus says this is bad news wrapped up in a protein. And I think that's a pretty good description of this, because all the bad news is here in the RNA, all protected by this protein coat. But I want to encourage you today that we are all in possession of good news that's wrapped up in the person of Jesus Christ. And that's what we're trying to proclaim each and every week through our services. And hopefully that this is something that you have held on to as well for your life, and to help you through this trying time right now.